and we move on to the next, to the second keynote in this morning session. So Cédric Gégout, come forward, please. Cédric is from Canonical. Cédric has many years of experience in telecom and IT. He has worked previously for Mitsubishi, Orange Labs, and MDocs. And he joined Canonical recently. And Canonical also recently joined the OpenAirInterface Software Alliance, which is great. I still remember, I think one of the first times I went to Mobile World Congress on behalf of OpenAirInterface, it was at the booth of Canonical. So they had hosted us, I think it was 2016. They hosted us there, so that was a great experience. So I'm happy Canonical is now also a member, a strategic member of the OpenAirInterface Alliance. And I'm looking forward to your talk called Open Source in Telecoms.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm very glad and very honored to be here. It was mentioned that OAI is a place to be. I'm very convinced that it is a place to be. I will explain why. For multiple reasons, not only for open source, but I think the fact that the main leaders of the 5G industry are using OpenAI, and it was just demonstrated in order to test their the fact that they are using OpenAirInterface in order to integrate, to test all those integration, it really means something. And it means that indeed it is, technically speaking, the place to be in order to develop your 5G and next time 6G software. I took also another note, which I think, you know, as it was said, I'm working in the telco domain for more than 30 years. I started really simulated the 3G radio signal and working for Mitsubishi in order to fight against France Telecom and Alcatel, and we managed to develop a WCDMA and then to remove the FTDMA of those guys. Then after I worked for Orange, so that's the story. But you know, when I started this story in 3G, I discovered that basically the world was a bit strange. A lot of technologies that was very proprietary, very specific, etc. A lot of people trying to fight against it. Then after I worked in 3GPP in order to develop multimedia technologies around MMS and streaming, and the same story, right? Working on the proprietary technologies, all the actors, Ericsson, Nokia, and others, even ourselves in Orange, trying to promote our own patents. I think if you integrate all the evolution for 30 years. And even now, in the last few years, you will see the same trend. You will see that this is dead. This approach is dead, and the rise of open source is very, very actual, right? And just what you mentioned, right? I think it's very important to work in the open source vibe. Otherwise, it doesn't work, and there is many reasons why. I will explain why. Canonical was really more or less at the beginning of it. It looks like we just joined OpenAirInterface, but actually my boss, my CEO, Mark Shuttleworth, the founder of Ubuntu, was there in 2016, working in Etsy, in OSM, and tried to create connections between OSM, Mano, and OpenAirInterface. And by the way, he would like to welcome this and to really help OpenAirInterface to promote. So that's why when I joined Canonical, it was for me obvious to join OpenAirInterface, and I was helped by Laurent de Persin, who was already a strategic member in the past, who helped me to join this organization. You all know Ubuntu, obviously. Well, I hope that you are using Ubuntu. Otherwise, just come to me later on and we will discuss. What is probably not so known is that Ubuntu has the largest community of developers, open source developers, by far compared to the others. Also, we are using Ubuntu everywhere. really everywhere. It's used in small devices like webcam. It's used in very big servers, in IBM Z-Frame that can run only Ubuntu and not on other operating system. It's also used, in the vault, for instance, of Apple in order to store their certificates, because this is the only way they can certify and protect their hardware. And so it's used everywhere by the largest community and for more than 20 years. So it gives you the sense of when we are developing something, when we are fixing something in Ubuntu, when we are adding a new feature, the blast radius of the impact is huge, which is a lot of responsibility, but it's also a lot of opportunity, because it gives us the opportunity to test Ubuntu in a very steady manner and very resilient manner. So as I said, it's everywhere. A number is about 60%, so 60% more or less of the cloud infrastructure, 60% of the data center, 60% of the developer community, cloud native developer community are using Ubuntu. More than 70% of the workstations, Linux workstations, are running Ubuntu, etc., etc. And on the edge devices, Ubuntu is by far the most used one, right? So I'm not here to promote only Ubuntu, just to give you the sense that when we are doing something, it's for almost all the Linux community. Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, has an interesting story. Mark Shuttleworth, the CEO now and the founder of Ubuntu, who was, as I said, in 2016 here and even before, working with Navid and others to promote OpenAirInterface, created Ubuntu in order to create a desktop that will be consistent and for all the developers in the world, right? It became a success, as we know, and it helped actually to promote a Linux distribution, only one for all the public clouds, to deploy in 28 their infrastructure, because they wanted to attract all the developers in the world, right? Then after all the public cloud, the software-defined approach of the public cloud became the reality in the private cloud, and it was quite natural for Canonical to start promoting orchestration technology Ubuntu in the telco domain in 2016, right? So we started really our journey in the telco domain in 2016. And the idea was really to solve the real issue of the telco networks. Again, I'm working in the telco now for more than 30 years, and the main issue I had, and we still have, is how to orchestrate this big mess. Right? I'm sorry to say it this way, but there are so many different versions, so many different technologies. You have VMs somewhere, you have containers elsewhere, you have Kubernetes, which is moving so fast that it's almost unmanageable if you have to manage it at scale, right? So we actually are working on this problem for a long time. Now what we are going, and I think it's important in the open source discussion, but where we are going is actually to support all the open source in the world, so not only Ubuntu, but to all the open source in the world. And for that, we have a track record for more than 20 years. We are every 2 years, providing an LTS, and for that, all the organization is very organized to be sure that the LTS is there in order to last for more than 12 years. When we have an LTS, it is supported for 12 years and more, sometimes according to the request of our customers, right? 12 years is a lot, seems to be almost too long, now that everything is moving so fast. Kubernetes, as I said, is moving so fast as well, that why do you need to support an operating system for 12 years? Well, it's because, for instance, a lot of telco operators, they are not changing the infrastructure so often, right? And as I said, even the bank or the organizations that needs to have something very resilient, they are still using IBM Z-Frame, for instance. They are still using very old hardware, right? So it's very important to have everything stable at the operating system level, and then after to be able to build on top of it. Canonical is actually providing on top of the open source, right? We are very respectful of the upstream, what is going on the upstream community. We are trying not to interfere too much unless we have to save or we have to really promote an open source that we believe needs to stay. Otherwise, our role is to really provide services on top of it, vulnerability management, compliance requirements for the public sectors, for the telcos, etc., right? And why it's important is because when you look at what is going on in the open source domain, there are many vulnerabilities, right? And if you look at the numbers, the main issue is that in order for one actor to fix only one vulnerability, it will take about 100 days to fix it properly, right? Why? Because you have a graph of dependency. You guys are Morse engineers, so you will understand that if you touch something, you have a dependency of a graph where each node has a connection with about 69 on average, so let's say 70 other projects, other packages. So if you touch something, you can break 70 other packages, right? And now people understand that now, only now, right? That's why, you have the Cyber Resilience Act. That's why now the institutions are saying, well, okay, that's good. What you are doing now with 20, 30 engineers in order to build your own operating system, that's great. But now you give this to people who knows how to manage this complexity, right? And I have a colleague over there from Red Hat. They're doing the same thing. This is our job, right? We are here for more than 20 years to actually fix those very complex graph of dependencies in order for the open source project to survive and to be able to work together, right? Most important, why so long as well? Why actually more than 5 years and 10 years? What we are speaking about that is because most of the vulnerabilities are there, dormant, waiting for somebody to break something in the upstream, and then the vulnerability will become from low severity to high severity, right? So the patch exists. Our role as Red Hat and Canonical, SUSE and others is to actually organize this and to be sure that everything is stable for the open source community. I think it was important to mention that. But when we go into the telco domain, actually, this is more or less the same story. Our role is to be sure that everything is stable, that the actors, like you guys working on OpenInterface source code, is to have something which is resilient, right? First, our solution, our magic recipe is to be as much as possible upstream and to actually to be sure that what the open source communities are doing upstream, they are doing the right thing. They need to focus on innovation. They need to focus on the upstream, and I will come back to this. The other thing is that obviously try to optimize everything. We are working a lot with all the silicon vendors in order to optimize Ubuntu on all the hardware, GPU, CPU, DPU, NPU, all those things are actually becoming more and more complex. And it's important that the operating system is optimized and have the right kernel, the right drivers in order to enable all those capabilities to the developers. Security, transparency, and trust is actually important. And this is basically what happened in terms of trend. I would like to highlight this part, is that when I started my career, what was important is to actually work in a closed mode, because then you are sure that you are, as a vendor, you can control everything, performance, security, etc. Right? Now this is completely the opposite. If you are not open source, if you are not open and not transparent, nobody will trust you, right? Because if there is an attack, you are not big enough to counter this attack, right? And that's why, for instance, in AI, there is a big trend in order to open source the models, because by definition, a closed model, which is proprietary, is actually a threat. It's actually a bot that can be attacked by somebody and then be distributed everywhere, right? So that's why this is very important to, again, respect this transparency and to be sure that everybody can share, everybody can fix, everybody can contribute to the same source code. Performance, compliance to industry standards, that's important. Telco grade and reliable, that's related as well to the orchestration aspect. I almost promised myself not to mention Juju. I did. But the fact is that OpenInterface started to be implemented on orchestrated with Juju, right? We are still investing for more than it was started in 2013, so about more than 11 years on Juju, because actually a lot of our customers are using it and it's becoming more and more powerful. So, but I mean, the technology is not so much important, and I will not focus too much on technologies today. But what is important is to have this kind of operational envelope, which become smarter and smarter and smarter. Okay, how you will integrate AI in your orchestration tool today, right? It's not easy, right? Because you need agents which are becoming smart and then can actually do the operations for you. I think in the world, a few years, people will look at us and say, what? They have scripts that are developed by a human being in order to operate thousands of servers or thousands of servers? Those guys were crazy, right? When you look at the images that you shared, I remember myself working, with this HTC devices and things like that, and I said, wow, okay. It was tough, right? It was complex and it was very error-prone, but at the end, we spend a lot of time on fixing those things. So let's look at the evolution, and I think why, in my opinion, why OpenAirInterface is really the place to be, because this is where this evolution is happening, right? Where everything that I said, that the vendors are trying to work in their own system, try to be very protective, those things are exploding, right? Disaggregation of the RAN, right? Using open source power and of the community in order really to accelerate those developments, right? I think I like very much your slide about the evolution of the 3GPP standard. I will be a bit controversial here, but it reminds me myself that 20 years ago when I was a 3GPP and we were building releases, right? Now the development, the deployment of the network is so slow, right? Even the standardization process is so slow that it cannot cope with all what is happening, right? If you remember, 3 years from now, even 2 years from now, we were not speaking about LLM. Now this is the tool for everybody to actually do their activities, right? A washing machine even, right? So what we have to build is a framework which can be extensible, right? And can cope with any use cases. Right? And that's why at Canonical we lack standards and we need to be compliant with standards. However, we believe more in the primary force of innovation of open source than from standards. Standards are there in order to define, to be sure that things, can indeed work together and to promote some use cases. But at the end of the day, most of the APIs we are using today are de facto standards defined by the open source communities, right? Let's face it. So we need to cope with that. And for me, and the message I want to send is that what is happening now needs to have open source, right? Because this is a way to be open, to be standards, to be interoperable. Without open source, you cannot test quickly. You cannot check, as you guys are doing with OpenAirInterface source code, quickly if everything will work together. Not only that it's working, but will work in the future where people will develop devices. Important as well that all the vendors are working together, right? And that myself, as Canonical, I will work with my Red Hat counterpart, right, to be sure that, again, everything can work together in order for the developers to rely on something stable. And that's why we joined, the ETSI in 2016. We promoted OSM Mano, and now we are here as a strategic member of OpenInterface. Okay, that's basically the main motivation. So, why Canonical and OpenInterface actually start to work together? We had a workshop, a few months ago, something like that, and now we are trying to promote the source code and also to make it enterprise grade. It's because actually, the role of a community is to innovate, to be upstream, right? But this community doesn't have the time to actually have long-term support, as I mentioned. 10 years, 12 years, backporting all the vulnerabilities, patching everything, be sure everything is stable, right? It's not the goal of the community to do that. Right? The community, again, main mission is to innovate. Also to focusing on the developer journey, right? The developers, they have multiple tools that they need to integrate together. How one community can be sure that everything will work together. It's very difficult, right? So this is also a role to be sure that the things is well integrated, and when integrated, eventually into a desktop, an Ubuntu desktop experience, where you can download things, everything will work together, right? and will not be incompatible. So that's why, this is what we see our role in order to promote and help all the developers to actually use this OAI source code, and we will do that as the same way as we are doing it in many other open source community. A point which is also important, security transparency, I already mentioned it, but I will elaborate a bit later on. But what is actually also important is this integration of the software on the hardware. As I said, we are very well placed, as our competitors obviously, to work with the silicon vendors and to optimize the kernel, the drivers on all the different platforms, right? We have long collaboration, for instance, with NVIDIA on AI and other, all the hardware, but we are working with all the vendors in the world in order to be sure that obviously it's working well. This is our mandate. And by doing so, we will give all the capabilities for your developers to develop. Looking forward, I think there are a lot of things to do and still do, and that's also why, for me it was the place to be in order to enter the OpenAI interface, because we believe that there are a lot of other things to do. For instance, I mentioned software orchestration and the fact that when you are deploying something, usually you are, as an IT engineer, that you have to deploy your software, even G-Node-B or Edge software everywhere. Now that everything is virtualized, it's even more complex. But when you are developing something, you are deploying something, you are usually not alone. You have a lot of other components, a lot of dependencies. And what is important is to be sure that when you upgrade things, you also upgrade the others with the same cadence or the same consistency, right? So security maintenance and keeping things available, it's a very complex science. And for that, we need very, very cutting edge and smart automation tools, right? I mentioned it before, how Canonical is addressing it. Cloud native development and executive environment, so be sure that what we are doing here together is working on the latest cloud native infrastructure with using the latest tools are, I think, very important. And I think there are some I think it's already something that started but needs to be continued. It was interesting to see that in terms of performance and real-time optimization and things like that, there are a lot of things to do still yet. We were the first ones to release a real-time kernel with LTS. We were the first one involved in this work with all the key vendors. And I think it's important to indeed be sure that all the optimization, especially in the real-time domain, low latency real-time, is actually promoted and used by the developer community of OAI. Right. So we also have mandates to be sure that everything is there. There is the subject about immutable OS and the fact that all the what we are doing in terms of deployment, in terms of orchestration, etc., is immutable by design, which means that you are developing something, you can roll back, you can things are you don't have all those graph of dependencies that needs to be managed by the developers anymore. They can just switch on their system, switch it off and restart. Very cloud native approach. So this approach needs to be everywhere, not only at the development level, but everywhere in all the activities that we have when we are managing a 5G network. And AI-driven network management, I think the presentation before me was actually much more interesting than what I can say. So why it's important for us, right? At the end of the day, we do business as well, right? But why it's important for us is because we have a real use case today. Okay, we are speaking about 5G as something that will happen few years from now, or something that actually is a bit not science fiction. We have 5G non-standalone, right? 5G standalone will still take time to be deployed, right? And the telcos and the operators will still be slow because deployment of a large-scale network will take a lot of time, right? But the reality of the business is not there. The reality of the business is private 5G network. Right? This is where we are focusing. It's also about things such as smart farms, where you have actually the farmer that need to manage his large farm with IoT, with a lot of IoT, with drones, with servers which are managing or collecting all the data, AI trying to understand what is going on in his field, etc., etc. Right? So we have real use case like that. We have customers or partners which are trying to solve those problems, and for that, they need 5G technology, right? Another example is V2X, right? V2X automotive. It's something that will come, in a few years. It's almost there in terms of technology, but they are afraid to deploy this because of the risks that it can create, and the population can push back. But the thing is that it's really use cases that exist today. All the partners are working on it. Large-scale rollout with telecom operators as well, because as soon as we virtualize everything, we can accelerate the deployment of it, and non-terrestrial communication. So all those use cases are here and are here today, right? And if we look at, we are working with some analysts to really understand that. Most of the CSPs, most of the actors trying to deliver services will deploy edge computing network in the next 2 years. And they want to deploy it with 5G. What else, right? They cannot use a Wi-Fi to deploy a network that will be deployed that has a diameter of few kilometers, right, or 10 kilometers, right? So they need 5G for that, and they will use 5G for that, right? Whatever the telcos will propose, right? So our role is to be sure that these open source communities are developing as fast as possible technologies in order for those guys to actually cope with their own business. So I think you understand that basically our mandate is not only to to help the open source communities to develop their technology. Our mandate is also to be sure that at the end of the day, those developers and we can make business with those technologies and to respond to the need of the market today, right? Again, why OpenAirInterface is a place to be now is because this is a technology to solve problems that will come in few years. Not about 6G, not about 5G with AI and stuff like that. I mean, I like very much your presentation, right? But there are a lot of expectations that AI will solve problems on the network in few years. It's too late. It's too late. So ourselves, at Canonical, we're always trying to see what will be very useful for those developers, for those communities at OAI, will be very useful for them. So we always ask us this question. Always. What will be amazing for those developers? That's a question that my CEO, when he's waking up in the morning, I'm sure he's asking this question. He has an idea every morning, crazy ideas many times, but sometimes very smart ideas. But he wants to really change the world every morning. So what will be amazing? But the first thing, as I mentioned, is that now in this network, everything is virtualized, distributed everywhere. Right. The challenge is not really to see how you can deploy your core network, how you can deploy your edge cloud, but how you will be able to move workloads from those different parts. Right. Your presentation also, sorry to mention it multiple times, but I think it was very interesting, and because models, for instance, AI models, you have to distribute those models between the UE and between the edge cloud, and for the edge cloud to a more central cloud, which is a near edge cloud, where things will happen, where you can do retraining, then you can redistribute your models, right? This is happening also with containers, right? And now all AI, containers on AI, they are including an inference engine plus the models. Nothing new, just the software plus the data, right? And this needs to be distributed everywhere across the globe, across the full network. Again, from UE to the cloud, right? And now we have edge cloud, we have different type of edge cloud, etc. So what will be amazing is to be able to manage the life cycle of each of the pieces which are distributed everywhere, right? This is the problem that we are trying to solve, and it's a very, very complex problem. Okay, when we are speaking now with OAI workloads that will be deployed, RAN workloads that will be deployed, people assume that this workload will be deployed only on this edge cloud and that's it, right? No, it will move, and it will move from one edge cloud to another, right? From one region to another, right? Resource will be optimized accordingly. So the idea is really to create this operational envelope, this smartness in terms of orchestration operation that will help all those components to be deployed and to have their own life cycle, right? And this is what we are doing, and this is basically the mandate. Sorry to mention again, but Juju, right? But we have a set of technologies that we built for more than 20 years in order to achieve that, right? Obviously, it's based on OpenStack. Obviously, it's based on Kubernetes because we believe that they are the right open source technologies to address those challenges. It's based also on other technologies that we have built, like the snaps, which are very instrumental in order to manage devices, but also the life cycle of the application on those devices, on those servers. By the way, the difference between a server and a device will become a bit blurry, especially in the edge cloud, because your server will become so low-end that at the end it will be just a small router, and you have a set of routers that are powerful enough to run your Kubernetes and your application on top of it, right? So how this will be deployed, how it will be managed, this is actually something that we are addressing, right? So that's one part, but we can ask also the question, but I'm a developer. What will be even more amazing? I understand that I need to deploy my workload everywhere, and it's a complex task, and I may not be able to develop those technologies for that, right? So people such as HashiCorp and others worked on it, right? Red Hat as well, we worked on it. So we have a lot of people trying to solve these problems, right? But what will be really amazing for a developer as well, right? I'm developing, what can I do with the application I've developed? As I said, security is important and long-term support is important. So our mandate, if you follow me from the beginning, is to be sure that those developers, when they are developing something, they can rely on some things, a vendor, an actor, or at least a community of developers that will ensure that everything that they can develop can be long-term support, can be built, and somebody will take care of it and will do long-term support. We have actors now in the cloud-native world that are doing so. We are doing so. We announced this year. Just look at everything LTS on internet, and you will see our announcement about that. But we have other actors which are also working on being sure that whenever some developer is developing something, he can rely on an actor that will say, I'm supporting you for a few years or 10 years, and you can do business with it, right? So creating avenue of commercialization for every open source in the world will be amazing, right? But this is basically what we are trying to do now, okay? And we are doing it starting with the containers, because this is where, as I said, cloud native development, this is where things are happening. So we are doing it not only at the OS level, but the tools level, the SDKs, building the runtimes that will have all the support and obviously all the application around it. So you are a developer on OpenAirInterface or a database or whatever, you say, okay, I'm developing my open source software. How can I be sure that, again, it will be supported for all the supply chain on any OS operating system as well, in order for me to make business and to be sure that actually things can be enterprise grade, telco grade, production grade, as ever you want to name it. Another thing which is also a last question that we are asking ourselves is what will be also amazing after we solve all those problems, and why, again, I hope you are convinced that there are real problems for the developers. Well, this is basically the orchestration of the application itself, right? To create an operational envelope to be sure that when you are developing a database, you don't have to care about operability such as provisioning, cluster deployment, failover, HA, scaling up and down, what else? Certificate management, so how to manage the security of it, how to be sure that everything is well established. Now with confidential computing, it will be even more complex because you will have more authority that where the application will have to say, sorry, but I need your certification now in order to be sure I can communicate with another applications, things like that, right? So all those operational envelope are ready to go. You just develop your workload and then you can rely on an existing ecosystem, an existing operational envelope that will take care of your application this way, right? And if you think about it, you can have a very generic approach, right? And that's basically what, as I said, I mentioned some actors are trying to address it, right? If you are building a database, that's more or less the same thing that you need to have in terms of operational operations, right? The thing that will become a challenge in this framework is that everything will become more and more complex, as I said, because it will be deployed not only on one cloud, but on many different clouds, many different type of clouds, many different substrates. It could be Azure, AWS, it could be a private cloud with Red Hat OpenStack or Canonical OpenStack or other things. So you need to be sure that all those operations are actually smart enough to understand the complexity. And for that, we need AI. And so we need to create not only a script or a declarative way to define what is happening, but technology to define agents, to implement agents that will take care of all those tasks and will be smart enough to understand what is going on. I have a few minutes left, and I will speak, and I said I will speak not too much on the technology, but I wanted just to close on this. We are actually acting, Serdar, our product manager here, is in charge of those two projects that I will mention, but we are actually building all the operational envelope, all the security around open source technologies for Open RAN. Our first attempt was Ether with ASD Core, which is competitor from OpenAirInterface Core Network. But we wanted to start with this one because even though we knew that we will work with, we will be a strategic member of OpenAirInterface because we wanted to test the interoperability of those different technologies. So we start with the 5G core and we orchestrate it, we make it enterprise grade, we propose this in order to promote those technologies. Now that it's part of the Linux foundations, it makes even more sense for us, but that's something that we will continue. But in parallel, we also did what we call we charmed. So charm, it means creating the operational envelope, the security, all the things that are worth discussing with OpenAirInterface RAN, right? So we started 6 months ago, but our objective is really to have a solution, open source solution, which is supported by a vendor that will enable all the actors to deploy their mobile private network, and not in 2 years, not in 5 years, but today, right? Or in beginning of 2025, when we will have fixed everything in terms of bugs and things like that, right? So that's basically our mandate. And for that, more than ever, we need the open source, right? We need 5G open source. So we need those communities of open source. I mentioned OpenAirInterface, I mentioned Ether with SD Core of Linux Foundation. There is also the Linux Edge Foundation. There is a lot of initiatives around it. We need all those open source communities to have the ability to innovate. And for that, and this is the only way the Open RAN will succeed. This is the only way RAN will succeed, right? We believe that the trend that started will not stop, will just accelerate. And with virtualization, with orchestration of the network, with AI that will be inside it, with all the things that we are doing, you know, the network, 5G network in 2 years will be quite different than what it is today, right? Because it's moving very fast and it is accelerating, right? Remember, you know, again, what is happening in AI, right? Now LLM, in few months, they became a de facto standard for many activities, AI activities that were not before. Optimization, our role again, to be sure that what is developed by the open source communities is production grade, optimized on the silicon. can be integrated in a cloud-native ecosystem easily. Interoperability in terms of hardware and software, this is basically what we are doing for more than 20 years, but that's something which is very important. So actors like us or competitors this is our mandate to ensure that. And long-term support, this is basically the way to address this market, and especially the telco market, right? So on this note, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer. I'm done and on time.
Thank you, Cédric. That was quite an impressive presentation. Thank you. What I was going to ask you, what would be amazing is if OpenAirInterface became part of the Ubuntu distribution, but it seems you're already on the way.
We are working on it. Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. Are there any questions to Cédric? No questions. You charmed everyone already.